Wow, great turnout, and looking out at the audience and seeing some of the faces, some of the uniforms and badges, I think we're pretty well protected here tonight. So that's nice to know. Good evening, Happy New Year, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we're very excited to be kicking off our 2023 events calendar by hosting Chief Stephen Sun, who of course led the Capitol Police during the January 6th assault on Congress. Chief Sun has written his own account of that ill-fated day in a new book released today, Courage Under Fire, Under Siege and Outnumbered 58-1 on January 6th. The chief makes the case that the siege wasn't just a single-day event or the consequence merely of a poorly planned security operation. He cites a number of cascading government failures that allowed for the brutal attack. Intelligence indicating the threat wasn't brought to the attention of top DC law enforcement officers. Congressional authorities refused a request in the days leading up to January 6th to place the National Guard on standby. And as the Capitol was under attack, the Pentagon delayed a decision to deploy troops. Further, the chief warns many of the factors that left the Capitol vulnerable remain unfixed. So there's an ongoing risk it could all happen again. Among the fundamental flaws he highlights is a Capitol Police power structure in which the political concerns of congressional leaders can overrule the security judgments of law enforcement professionals. Now, Chief Sun has devoted much of his working life to law enforcement. By January 2021, he'd been heading the Capitol Police for about 18 months. And before that, he spent 25 years with the DC Police, during which he rose from street cop to the rank of deputy chief, and had spent 5 years commanding the elite Special Operations Division. Over the years, he'd been deeply involved in security planning for a number of Washington's high-profile events, including inaugurations and protests. He resigned a day after the insurrection when Nancy Pelosi publicly called for him to step down over the department's inability to secure the Capitol. He writes that he holds himself accountable for what his police forces endured and wishes he could have done more. But in looking back at what went wrong, he sees issues that have plagued security on Capitol Hill for decades and calls the events of January 6th a perfect storm of ill-informed planning, preparation, and response involving many more players than just the United States Capitol Police. And his goal, as he'll elaborate on in a minute in writing the book, was to provide information in the same way that he's policed, based on the facts in a fair and non-political fashion. So we're very pleased to have him here, and please join me in welcoming Stephen Sun.
Wow, what a day. I'm truly humbled to be here. Wow, I'm looking at everybody out there, and what a day, and happy to see everybody here. What I'm really happy to see is the mix of people that we have here. I'm seeing a lot of police officers. There we go. Hey, can you hear me better now? Okay, there we go. Much better now. I'm getting the thumbs up in the back. I'm seeing a number of my fellow police officers, but I'm also seeing a lot of the community, and I'm glad the community's out here for this. Ed Bradley, I'd like to thank you and your staff for having this here. Politics and Prose, what a great place to do a book launch for a book like this. Politics, capital P, if politics doesn't play into something, but what a great bookstore. And in fact, it's been a staple of Washington, D.C. as long as it has. You know, I'm not telling all of you, your community here, but this is an incredible place, so glad you persist. You've got live stream. Where's the camera for live stream? Over here? I just want to take a second because I know a lot of people that were going to be here are stuck down at the Capitol because, again, we have a lot of craziness going on down there. So those of you, I've gotten so many texts in the command center, thinking about you. I know you're here. So anyway, appreciate everything you're doing. So anyway, January 6th, very personal day for every officer that worked it, but also a very personal day for all of you. How many of you were watching on TV, screaming at the TV, where the hell are the cops? Where the hell's the military? It's some of my military friends out here. Thank you. It was a very, very tough day, and it is a very, very personal story. And I tried to relate that as best I could in the book. And I'm glad, Ed, that you had pointed out that I tried to write it in the same fashion that I police. You should be, as you read through this, it's very fact-based. There's lots of footnotes, lots of information. There's so much in here that I think people don't realize we face as security in Washington, D.C., but let alone as the chief of police. My reason for writing it is I don't want to see this happen again. There's a lot of lessons to learn. I still think lessons to be learned. And I don't want it to be out here in a political bias fashion. You should know what my political leaning is. You should know what the facts are. I'm just going to provide the facts in an unbiased way so you can really understand what happened. So I don't want it to happen again. But there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that came out about January 6th. A lot of stuff that my officers were complicit. They were racist. They were Trump supporters that just opened the doors and let people in. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Every single one of my officers out there worked very, very hard. I think there's a lot of videos out there that I'm more than happy to explain about that people saw, that they thought they were opening gates, letting people in. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Every single one of my officers acted in an exemplary fashion. They swore an oath, and they upheld that oath that day. And I certainly do appreciate that. So I really want to stand up for the officers. I came out the very next day, even though a lot of members of Congress had said, your officers failed. They let them in. There's a lot of name calling. I felt they did not fail. Not a single member of Congress was hurt. Not a single member of Congress was injured. And I thought that was important for somebody to stand up for the officers and make sure that their leader felt that way and to look out for them. But I want to make sure this doesn't happen. So I wanted to write this book, wanted to put it down and get it so we can use this as a textbook to kind of move forward. What is it about? I want to give you a couple little tidbits. A lot of people were telling me I come out and read a little bit. All of you can read. You're going to have an interesting time reading. There's a lot in here that you're going to get out of it. So I don't think I'm reading it, but I want to take through kind of what it's about. So it starts off, it covers everything from really who's who in Washington, D.C. It talks about the Capitol Police. Your Capitol Police Department, United States Capitol Police, is a very unique police agency. Everyone's heard of the FBI, the Secret Service, the DEA. Those are all executive branch agencies. They have numerous law enforcement agencies, Customs Border Patrol, people like that. The legislative branch of Congress has one law enforcement agency. It's the United States Capitol Police. They're the ones that are responsible for maintaining security for Congress and the elected officials. So I talk about that. And what people don't realize is the security structure that's set up on the Hill. I have a Capitol Police Board. It's made up of 3 politically appointed members. Those are the 3 voting members. There's 4 people in the Capitol Police Board. I'm the 4th person, a non-voting member. But you have 3 politically aligned people. You have a House Sergeant at Arms, you have a Senate Sergeant at Arms, and you have the architect of the Capitol. House and Senate Sergeant at Arms are both politically appointed by the respective branches of Congress, and the architect of the Capitol is appointed by the president. President Donald Trump actually appointed Brett Blanton. So people don't realize I have that structure that I have to deal with as a chief of police. And the 2 sergeant at arms are known as the head law enforcement officials for their branch of government. So when you think of me as the chief, I've got 2 chiefs over me. So on top of that, you have 4 politically aligned oversight committees. The problem with that is when you have 4 politically aligned oversight committees that are reporting to their respective political parties within Congress, you have a recipe for disaster. And that kind of led toward what I dealt with on January 6th, is just a really convoluted security structure that ran into delay after delay. So we're going to go in a little bit of that. I talk about who's who in Washington. I talk about my relationship with Speaker Pelosi. Had a good relationship with her. President Trump, President Biden, both of them very good relationships. and I talk about the different agencies that are helping to support law enforcement in Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, we got a lot of those here. Intelligence branch, DHS, FBI, kind of give an overview of that. And then I go in and I talk about kind of where we are as a society, the gathering storm. You talk about the protests of 2020, things that were going on in Washington, D.C., tempers were ramping. We came into the MAGA 1, which was the November MAGA event, then the December MAGA event, which was MAGA 2. We talk about how that's building, and then we come into MAGA 3, and I give a detailed description of all our planning, everything that went into it. Then have anybody in here read parts of the book so far? We got a couple people. You've got a minute-by-minute chapter that's going to take you through everything for January 6th. That is pretty incredible. There's a lot. There's probably going to be some questions about that, but it takes you through the pipe bombs that we had, the concern I had in the command center that we may be dealing with a diversionary tactic. But then we talk about 12:53 p.m. when we get hit on the West Front. So we go through, we talk about the minute by minute, the aftermath that I faced and my officers faced, what went wrong in the January 6th hearing. It ties it all together. It's interesting. January 6th hearing, I've had a lot of people ask me, what do you think of the hearing in their report that they just put out? I haven't looked at the whole, I think it's 846 pages, but I will tell you, their recommendation for us was for more oversight. I just told you what type of oversight we have, and I don't think more oversight is going to be the thing that we really need for it. But I want to go in and talk about a couple things. So why is it called Courage Under Fire? And please excuse me, it's been a long day and for me. So why is it called Courage Under Fire? I've had a lot of people ask me that. It's called Courage Under Fire because the police officers were the ones that saved the day. Even though they had been ridiculed, they had been called names, they had been told that they're complacent and contributed to this, they came and they saved the day that day. So that's why it's called Courage Under Fire. I've had a lot of people talk to me about the officers, the misconduct, the easy breach. People in here think the officers opened some of the gates for people, let them in. There's a story where an officer, well, it's not a story, it's a video, where an officer is on the West Front and he's got his hand on a bike rack. These bike racks are 8 to 10 feet long, 42-pound bike racks. There's 3 of them hooked together. They hook together, but he's here and he's got his hand backhanded on the bike rack. What looks like him pushing it out of the way as a large crowd's coming up toward him. A lot of people said, oh, he just pushed it out of the way, let the crowd come up, and everyone waved. Everyone have that conception? Anyone else thinks that's what the officer did? No, hopefully that's been dispelled. It's a 42-pound bike rack. There's 3 of them hooked together. It's impossible to push it out of the way with the back of your hand, to push it out of the way. And when they wave like this, they weren't waving at the protesters come up. They were waving at the other cops, because we had cops from 17 law enforcement agencies come up to help us who were on different radio zones, to waving at them to come up, take shelter, because we're going back to a next fallback position. So we had concerns that people were saying it was a quick, easy breach of the Capitol. So I was hit on the west front of the Capitol at 12:53 p.m. when the crowd came across Peace Circle and Garfield Circle on the west front and began immediately fighting with my officers there at the barriers. They did not, as the battle raged on, the officers kept having to back up farther and farther. As just thousands of people came onto the West Front and started pushing officers back. I thank God for the Metropolitan Police Department. They were the first ones to come to our aid. I called over to them at about 12:58, and they immediately sent in a couple hundred officers. We had actually worked with them to pre-stage early over on Constitution Avenue. If those officers hadn't been there, we'd be dealing with a much worse day. That breach of the Capitol would have happened much quicker, and I don't even want to think what would have happened. We could have been dealing with some dead members of Congress. So I thank them for that. But it wasn't an easy breach. You got to think about this. We got hit at 12:53 p.m. They kept fighting and fighting and fighting. They defended every single inch of that Capitol grounds for 80 minutes. Think about that. 80 minutes until the protesters were finally made it up to what's called the skin of the building and broke the first window of the Capitol at 2:12 p.m. 80 minutes. Think about that. That's a long time for people to be fighting. But I couldn't thank enough for everyone that was out there fighting that day. The book is dedicated to all the officers that were out there fighting. I will forever be grateful to them. It was something else to see what they went through that day, and I'm sorry that they went through it. trying to think. So kind of moving away, what do I see? Some of the big takeaway issues with this is the security structure on the Hill absolutely positively has to be changed. You can't have a chief that's being held accountable for security on the Hill and in such an important institution as the Capitol that has such political influences occurring on him. It just is a recipe for disaster. A lot of people talk about intelligence. Hey, how did we not see this coming? You think about the intelligence the FBI has, DHS, we had 9/11, and after 9/11, we created DHS, a huge Homeland Security agency that's designed specifically to connect the dots so we don't have another 9/11 that happened. So how did we miss this? You look back and you think about the intel they have, but this was different. For some reason, January 6th was treated a little bit different. We didn't have the FBI as they would in the past. When you have a big event in Washington, D.C., the FBI will usually call together and do one of a couple things. They'll either hold an executive briefing to say, hey, we're seeing a lot of threats associated with the upcoming joint session of Congress, or we're going to put together a joint intelligence bulletin, or just a conference call. We didn't get any of those. DHS didn't put together a intelligence alert or any knowledge like that. And as we're under attack, within about 20 minutes of us being under attack, I think it's right around 1:10, and this is all documented in the book, DHS sends a notice over to the Pentagon saying there's no illegal activity occurring in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's just, you scratch your head when you look at this. But the intelligence that was out there, you got to understand, I, as an agency and as a leader, I base our operational response on the intelligence that we have. When you have intelligence that there's 4 intelligence assessments that are put out by my own agency in advance of January 6th, one on December 23rd, I think it's December 16th, 23rd, 30th, and January 3rd. The first 3 assessments are basically saying the exact same thing. This is going to be just like the first 2 MAGA events. Even the 4th assessment said that it's a 15-page assessment. The first 15 pages are pointing out, much like we had seen before. We expected, like the previous demonstrations, for people to come armed. We expected Proud Boys to be there, some members of the militia, but they said the same thing. It's going to be just like the first 2 MAGA events. We weren't expecting, myself, Robert Conti, any of the other chiefs weren't expecting a coordinated attack on the Capitol. They had a final paragraph that outlined that it could be a dangerous situation for law enforcement. The focus of the demonstration is Congress itself. Anybody that comes up to protest at the Capitol, their focus is Congress. That's why they're up there protesting. So that in itself, I didn't take as a major red flag. So we get through the intel. None of it says we're seeing intelligence out there of people planning a coordinated attack for it. And then the very next day, my intelligence section provides reviews of the permits that are being applied for on Capitol grounds, recommends I approve them. Say there's a low probability of arrests or demonstrations. They put out an assessment on the 4th that says all the demonstrations for Washington, D.C. are assessed at low probability of arrests. They put that same report out for the 4th, the 5th, for 4th, 5th, and the 6th. So coming into January 6th, I'm not expecting what we're facing. I talk in the book about me going on January 3rd to request the National Guard. My request for the National Guard was based on my experience. I have 25 years of doing major events in Washington, D.C. I have time of doing major events here with the Capitol when I was there. I knew we had a joint session of Congress going in that was taking place. The first 2 MAGA events, I didn't have a joint session of Congress. I didn't have all the staffing requirements I had to put inside the building this time. I had numerous staffing requirements inside the building to help support the vice president being there, members of Congress expected to go back and forth between their chambers. So that was going to take significant staffing. My request to go over and request the National Guard was specific because of my experience and knowing my biggest vulnerability was going to be the perimeter. All I wanted was unarmed National Guard to help staff the perimeter, help stand the perimeter and keep people from jumping over the fence that may have prevented this. And again, I ran into the thing everyone's heard, a 71-minute delay. Well, I'm sorry, January 3rd, it's denied because the concern for the look of National Guard on Capitol grounds. It's my belief that relates back to what was seen in cities around the country and in Washington, D.C. during 2020. You had federal agents, you had National Guard on the streets handling the protests. And I think a number of political figures, including Speaker Pelosi, was concerned about the look of federal troops out there, referring to them as stormtroopers. So I think when Mr. Irving referred to the look, not liking the optics and the intelligence not supporting it, it's true. I concurred that the intelligence at that time did not support it. But I do believe that was because of the leadership's concern and with the look of stormtroopers or National Guard on Capitol grounds. So got denied. We are set up with our CDU. We deployed what's called a Civil Disturbance Unit force to help protect our perimeter. It's a limited group. I would have liked more, but it's a limited group that can provide support for the perimeter. Then we come into January 6th. We have the pipe bomb that comes out right before we're attacked on the West Front. 12:53, the attack goes out. 12:55, my first call is over to MPD. They're sending in the cavalry. My next call is to Paul Irving requesting the National Guard. And one of the gentlemen that was sitting right to my left when I was making those calls is here today. Numerous calls over and over and over requesting the National Guard. 71 minutes go by while my men and women are fighting, defending every inch of ground on those Capitol grounds before they finally give me the approval for the National Guard. Then I find I have to go to the Pentagon and I have to start fighting Pentagon brass, begging and pleading. And when I tell you I was begging for National Guard. I was watching my officers being beaten, being pummeled. And the reason why National Guard is important, you're probably wondering, why turn to National Guard? I have exhausted all my federal resources. I've exhausted all the local resources calling them in. When law enforcement runs short and we need help and we pick up the phone and dial 911, it's the National Guard we're calling. It's a process that's there. It's a policy. It's called the Defense Support for Civil Authorities. And that's what I was trying to activate. The other thing you need to realize, and you'll think it's kind of crazy as you're thinking about, what does the chief of the Capitol Police have to deal with? I'm the only chief of police in the United States of America that has a federal law preventing me from calling in federal resources, federal assistance before an event and during an event without the Capitol Police Boards, an emergency like what we saw on January 6th, where my officers are being pummeled without the Capitol Police Board giving its approval. And that's like I talked about, a recipe for disaster. So that's something that a lot of people they're very surprised to hear that. So I finally get that approval. I go to the National Guard. 2:34 p.m. I'm on the phone with the brass, Lieutenant General Piott, Lieutenant General Flynn over at the Pentagon, begging for assistance. 3.5 hours go by before a single National Guard show up. They show up at 5:40. We swear in the first 150 National Guard. And guess what? Guess what was within eyesight of the Capitol, just standing blocks east of the Capitol? 150 National Guardsmen with their gear, ready to go. They would have come. They were so furious when they got up to the Capitol. They would have deployed if their leaders had allowed them to. And to think of the craziness of this. You're all in Washington, D.C. Here's the Capitol. Capitol's right in the center of Washington, D.C. And I want to turn this around for you. So east of the Capitol is the D.C. Armory, about 2 miles east. That's the headquarters of the D.C. National Guard. West of it is about where 150 National Guardsmen were assigned. This is what I talk about in the book, and this is just one of the many things that you'll learn reading this book. Those National Guardsmen never stepped foot from their post to come and assist us. What did they do? They left, they went back to the Armory, and they sent the second shift from the Armory to finally come and assist us. Why? Because they had to plan for now what I think is an attack they knew was coming. General Milley had talked about on the 3rd and the 4th about having concern for mass violence in Washington, D.C. Concern that was so great that him and Defense Secretary Miller had talked about it, that they were worried about locking down the city. They were talking about revoking the permits on Capitol grounds. You know who signs those permits? Me. Do you know who they didn't talk to about their concerns? Me. That would have been helpful to help me set up and begin to prepare for this. But 3.5 hours on top of the 71 minutes my officers had to wait before any resources finally could come up there. But I look at this and, I know the men and women of the military. I come from a military family. I have the utmost respect for them. I have the utmost respect for those willing to tell the truth. Some are here. But those that stonewalled it and kept them out of the fight specifically because they're concerned for optics, or I have other reasons I outline in the book why I think they may have been delayed. I think it's irreprehensible. I think seeing my officers fight like that and being subjected to that is unacceptable. So, when I look at it and everything that went on between, intelligence failures, the Department of Defense and the security structure, those things still exist today. And I'm really worried that something like this could happen again. And last thing I want to do is see any officers, whether it's the Capitol, the White House, think about what could happen if something like that were to happen at the White House. And I know people say, oh, we train for it. You get thousands of people climbing over the fence of the White House, it's going to be a real bad day. I don't even want to think about the bloodshed. We got to figure out how to stop it. And, before going into any questions, I want to say this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. We're at a very divided point in our country. We're seeing it, like we talked about, taking place down on Capitol Hill today. You're seeing profanity used on the floor of the House. That's no way to lead a country. And I do believe that we are at a divisive point. It's not one political party's problem. Both political parties are responsible for the position that we are in as a country. We need to start going back and looking at, where's our true statespeople? When you elect an official, they need to realize words matter and stop this violent rhetoric. Because as a nation, we're only going to heal and move forward if we begin to lead by example. And I talk a lot about that. I talk about how we've kind of drifted away from the rule of law and the role that plays in a civil society, and kind of try and wrap it up there. I tell people it was a very difficult book to write. I started, I didn't plan on writing a book. And my attorney's here, and Lisa Banks, it's great seeing you, and she'll attest to this. I sat back, and my number one goal was to make sure people knew what really happened. We sat back. I wrote a letter to Congress, 8-page letter to Congress. I appreciate the fact that I got 0 responses. I had to fight. People don't realize this, and you'll learn about it in the book. I had to fight to testify in the Senate. The Senate originally did not want me to testify, did not want anybody that no longer was in their position to testify. So I had to actually go to them and tell them I'll testify, and testify in person. I was the only person that testified in person that first day, because my goal was to try and get the truth out. And it just wasn't getting out. We wrote the letter, I was on 60 Minutes, and it still wasn't getting out. And then from there, I started writing. And as I started talking to more people came out of the woodwork, and more people wanted to talk to me about what was going on. Not just about January 6th, but also about 2020, also about the protests that was happening down around the White House, protests that was happening in the city, the things that were happening that was really politicizing law enforcement. And it's very dangerous when law enforcement in the military becomes politicized. So I'm going to get ready to open up to questions, but I do believe as a society, we need to find a way to fix this somehow, because it's only getting worse. And I don't want to see, this is a great country, this is a great nation, and I don't want to see this continue to de-escalate. Go down the road that we're on right now. This needs to change. And I look to our leaders. It's a government by the people, for the people. We elected them. We need to make sure they're doing what we want them to do in a civil fashion. But it was good 12, 13, 14 months of writing. And I tell people it was hard as hell to write. And I honestly do. I wish I wasn't here today. I wish I didn't have to write this book. I do wish, none of this is stuff I'm really excited about. But I do want to see this changed, and I do want to see us move forward. I'm more than happy to open up to questions. I know we got a few people here, and I know there may be a few questions. I'd be happy to, if anybody likes them. Yes, sir. There's. Thank you. There is a microphone if you want to use it. If you don't, I'll just repeat the question so everybody can hear it.
Disconcerting thing for me to come out of the aftermath is how the rank and file police officers across so many organizations, municipal, DC police, have continued to support or have vilified certain members of the Capitol Police who've spoken out against the insurrection, like Michael Fanone, who was ostracized from the DC police. But you hear it across all segments of the, every police department that I have been involved with, which is several, still continue by the vast majority to support the party of insurrection and the leader of that insurrection. What you spent 25 years in the DC Police Department, what do you attribute that to? That they cannot see that they are under attack and we're left hanging.
So I'll tell you this. Oh yeah. So the question was, let me try and synopsis it. Why does it seem like we have a lot of people within law enforcement that seem to be supporting the party of the insurrection? Because it sounds like a couple different questions. Why are they ostracizing people in the different police departments like Michael Fanone for it? So I want to make sure I'm getting that right. Why are they supporting? Why are they ostracizing him?
Why do they continue to support the party and the people and the one person who led all of this and ostracize their fellow officers who've spoken out against it, who actually defended the Capitol?
So I'll tell you this. This is probably the best way for me to answer it, because my position is as a police officer, whether I'm pulling you over, whether I'm handling an event up at the Capitol, whether you're coming up for a protest, you really shouldn't know my political leanings, because it has no bearing on how I'm going to treat you and how I'm going to treat your event. I'm going to answer your question. So that's why I wrote the book as I did. I think it's important for police officers to consider that when they're there and they have their uniform on, about really making your political position known. Because really, if someone's coming up having a First Amendment demonstration, whether it's a pro-Trump group or whatever group it may be, that group should all be handled the same. It relates back to when I talk about the rule of law. Everyone should be treated the same according to the rule of law. And I'll tell you, I had 1,700 law enforcement officers come from 17 different agencies as far away as the New Jersey State Police. We all raised our right hand. We all swore an oath to the Constitution, and every single one of those officers defended the Constitution that day. So you may have some that come out and will make comments about fellow police officers. I don't know. I've never met Michael Fanone. I never worked with him when I was at DC Police, and that may be just some of the personal perceptions that they have. But when it comes down to brass tacks, these officers are going to defend every inch of ground and defend the Constitution. I haven't had any problem with that whatsoever. Yes, sir.
Chief, first of all, thank you for everything you've done and tried to do. We in Washington appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
But I'm wondering, did you have any opportunity to do any handoff or transition after you were, fired, basically?
Wow. So many emotions. I would have loved to. I will tell you, it's the honest God truth. I love the men and women of the Capitol Police Department. I love the men and women of the Metropolitan Police Department. But I had developed such a close relationship with these officers, and they have such a unique job. It's tough to be up there screening in people into a building, and day in and day out. We were developing pride. Morale was coming back to the department, and I'd really developed a connection with these officers, and things were moving in the right direction. To be torn away from them at that point really, really was tough. For it. I forgot the initial part of your question. I'm sorry.
Was there any opportunity for transition?
Yeah, the transition. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Handle.
So then when Speaker Pelosi came up and asked for my resignation, usually when a official leaves, they'll usually make it effective the end of a pay period, which I did. And I don't want to give away. There's so many little interesting things you're just going to scratch your head and say that really. Anyway, that was bad. So I originally had said I'm going to resign effective the 16th. I think it's January 16th, which would have been the end of the pay period, specifically to give that transition to set it up. And I talk about the process that went through when they selected my replacement and concerns I think that created for the department. So I was in place to do that. The next morning, I received a call at home saying that's not going to happen. You're gone immediately. And you'll read about that in the book. I don't want to ruin all the little things, but it was a call I received from a pretty high-ranking person that, ended my career the very next day, and there was no chance for that transition. I went back in, and you'll read about a lot of personal
What were the
stuff that-
ramifications of that then? You're not having the chance to hand off or just bring somebody up to speed.
Well, so the two assistant chiefs are usually pretty close and pretty up to speed, but I would say they're significant in the sense of, it's any big, large organization. If you're going to change leaders, you should really do some messaging out to the workforce. I can't tell you how many people. One, I had people come up to me angry, mad that I was bailing on them as quick as I could. I would have loved to stay. There's a story in there. The day before, we had a reporter call late on the 6th and say, "Are you going to resign?" And I said, "Hell no, I'm not going to resign. I've been here. I've seen this to this point. I'm going to see this through. I've called for an after action. I'd already reached out to the Bureau to get their critical incident response group to help us do an after action. I want to find out what happened." So I would have loved to have a nice transition. I would have loved to do that and create a little more smooth transition. No matter how you're going to cut it, a transition after January 6th wasn't going to be, textbook smooth, but it could have been a whole lot better if, I wasn't pulled out right the very next day.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate the question. Go ahead. Well, I'll get to one in the back. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
First, I'd like to say thank you for being here and giving the talk and for the work that you've done. And I thought your point about the optics with the National Guard was really interesting. I was wondering if you could talk about maybe other barriers that you would see to the cooperation that's needed or the collaboration needed, with the federal, sorry, my words are tripping up, but with the collaboration that's needed.
So I'm gonna take your question a little bit farther, because the collaboration that's needed in Washington D.C. is unique, and I described this in the book, and here we go down. There's so much that you're gonna learn. So Washington D.C. Anybody know how many law enforcement agencies you got in Washington? Dozens. I think it's about 37, 40, right around there. I tell people a story of the 900 block of Pennsylvania Avenue. My MPD folks will know we've handled so many demonstrations there. You have FBI on the north side. You have Department of Justice on the south side of the block. Department of Justice is Federal Protective Service, has Federal Protective Service, and has a security guard. The sidewalk is Park Police territory. The street is MPD. The north sidewalk is Park Police, and FBI has FBI police. 5 jurisdictions, and all you're doing is crossing the street. But you talk about coordination. We have very good coordination in Washington, D.C. We have very good coordination with the military. We meet with the military all the time. Good seeing you, sir. We talk about the military all the time, and we'd work with them and handle events. I've done IMFs, I've done inauguration. I've sworn in so many National Guard as special police officers, thousands of them. I know the process. It's a Defense Support Civil Authority process. You can go online, you can look it up. So we have good coordination. What happened on January 6th was unique. And I have my reasons for why I think it was a little unique, and I'll let you read about that. But there's good coordination. We just need to find out why we had that one roadblock with National Guard. But the law enforcement, great coordination there.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. We had one in the back.
Thanks so much for taking the time and spending this all your career. It's greatly appreciated by the community and all of us. I was wondering if you could touch on, I believe it was January 4th, where there was a change in the protocol of you reaching out to the National Guard. I think something changed on that date, and I didn't hear you mention that. Was there a letter, or was there something that prevented them from coming out?
So, as a matter of fact, I've got it somewhere in there. So January 4th, and this is something I didn't know about. It's interesting you bring it up. You bring up the January 4th memo from Secretary of Defense Miller that he puts out, and there's a copy of it in the book. So like I talked about, when police departments dial 911, they're calling the National Guard. Well, imagine if you called your police department, someone said, well, hey, guess what? Someone disarmed us. We can't get our shields. We can't get all this equipment. We can't carry batons. We can't carry bayonets, everything like that. Well, Secretary Miller puts us this memo January 4th, specifically taking all the riot gear, all the equipment that we'd need if the violence that he was expecting to happen on the 5th and 6th had occurred specifically for January 5th and 6th. Yeah, this is the memo you talk about. It's online. Anybody can find it. That removes everything. I mean, riot control agents, body armor, helmets, to share equipment with law enforcement agencies, helicopters, air assets, ballistic protective equipment. The very things that you think they would need for the violence they said they thought was coming for January 6th. And they never told their stakeholders, the very people that might be picking up the phone and dialing 911 for their help. I don't even think they told the National Guard, the commanding general of the National Guard, or the commanding general of the Military District of Washington, Omar Jones. We were on a video call the day before. All the top law enforcement leaders from Washington, D.C. and the military. And they never said, oh, guess what? Just letting you know ahead of time, our hands are going to be tied for January 6th. Because they didn't even tell their own people. I don't even think they told their own people some of the fears they had about the violence. So that's a very, very good question. That's what happened January 4th. You'll read about it. There's still a lot more. Yes.
So thanks for writing the book. I appreciate your leadership.
Thank you.
Even when I was working for you. And I guess one thing I really would feel strongly about is that because of my personal experiences working at the Capitol Police and the position that I held in the meetings that you and I were in, you can't explain to the average person how the Hill works on a daily operation. But I can tell you from personal experience that the things that Chief Son stated about politics, in some cases overriding what's right from the security practice or a law enforcement practice, goes on and had been going on. I was not working on January 6th. I worked previous to that. But I was working directly at some fairly senior levels in that claim. And it was a constant, everyday, unique experience. But all that said, I think a couple of things that are unique about the situation, and especially with the National Guard, is that every state's governor can enact the National Guard. The mayor of DC doesn't have that authority. So something that I'm not sure how focused is looked at. Vice President Pence left the Capitol. He went to the Pentagon, correct?
No. On the 6th?
Yeah.
No, he stayed with us the entire time.
But once they got him out,
No, he stayed with us the entire time.
my understanding was that he was the one that actually got the secretary to enact the National Guard.
I spent a little time with him. He was making some of the same calls I was making, getting some of the same responses I was making. They may have told him National Guard's coming, like they told Speaker Pelosi. But they waited 3.5 hours before giving General Walker the approval to send them.
But it was Vice President that actually had to get them.
He was involved. He was involved. You had members of Congress. You had the governor of Virginia and governor of Maryland, all saying the same thing. We're trying to send our troops. Our troops, we can't send them. We can't activate them. So for those that didn't hear, he was just referring just how the political influences affect security on the Hill, especially when it comes to whether it's the use of the National Guard or some of the security decisions you were having to make regarding some of the physical security. And it's just sad that it's that way because it really should be.
It's the one place in Washington, D.C. in the federal government where actual real life security events have happened. I mean, Pentagon, but police officers shot and killed, security camera element. I mean, it's not a hypothetical.
Yeah.
It happened.
Yeah. And he talks about some of the events that have happened. There's one police department in the country that I'm aware of that's I want to make sure, I'm pretty sure, that's been the target of 2 biological attacks. And that's the Capitol Police, anthrax and ricin. Think about that. They've had Puerto Rican nationalists open fire in one of the chambers. They've had pipe bomb, an explosive. I don't know if it's a pipe bomb, an explosive detonated. 2 explosives detonated. And one of them, if I remember correctly, almost seriously injured a female Capitol Police officer. So they have been targeted before. I hope they're not targeted again because I care so much about them. But you're right. Security, that's one of the biggest takeaways. Security should not be politicized. It shouldn't matter. So, you bring up a very good point, and I appreciate you going through that with me. But
Could I just ask, in deference to the people watching who are live streaming, if you have a question, you can make it up to the mic? Could you come up, please?
I'll do my best to repeat some of them. It's just the questions get really long. So,
Hi. I work down near the Capitol, and for years at lunchtime, I would take walks around the Capitol. And anytime there was an important event or an important person who was going to be there, you would be walking by, and the Capitol police officer would immediately stop you and order you to leave that side of the street. And they're very forceful, they're very aggressive. And I always thought, wow, I sure wouldn't want these people to think I'm not listening to them and getting off the street really quickly, because there would definitely be consequences. And then as I was watching this unfold on television, I really was very surprised that it wasn't an initially much more forceful response based on how I'd seen them react just to somebody walking down the street when they're trying to keep things safe. And considering this mob was coming to kill members of Congress and the vice president, I understood when they busted that window and the woman went through there, they shot her. But why didn't they have a more forceful, like shooting these people kind of response if what they're doing is trying to protect the members of Congress from being killed?
There's a lot of ways of answering that. I'm going to give you the best answer possible because I talk about that specifically in the book. And you're not the first person I've heard that from. Mm-hmm. But you got to think of this. Every police officer is trained. So it goes to extensive training on the use of force, especially the use of lethal force. And you got to think that you're responsible for every round, every bullet that leaves your gun. And you got to make sure that you know that whoever I'm going to shoot at, if I miss, because, we've been fighting 80 minutes. I told you about that. My heart's pounding. I could be moving. I'm responsible for that. So I've talked to several instructors. I've talked to instructors that were there on January 6th. I think there were a number of situations where officers would have been justified with using lethal force, but tactically it wasn't the right thing to do. And I'm happy that more didn't use it. It could have turned into a real bad day. No member of Congress was hurt. No member of Congress was killed. We had, any loss of life is unfortunate. We had several associated with the protests. The shooting of Ashley Babbitt. Like I said, any loss of life is not good. But I'm proud of the restraint the 17 law enforcement agencies in the United States Capitol Police used that day. It would have been a tragic day in American history if more people would have been killed.
So there was no second guessing, like maybe we should have been more forceful and we could have stopped this sooner from getting to the point that it did?
When you talk about being more forceful, we had 17 law enforcement agencies. And I will tell you, Metropolitan Police Department is one of the largest agencies here. I think they expended their less lethal munitions, their whole cachet for the city there. So the idea that they were treated light-handed, they weren't, forcefully dealt with, they were. And that's ultimately what changed the tide. That I don't think reverting to a large use of lethal force would have been the right thing to do. Good question, though. Are you able to come up to the mic? Yes, ma'am. And I appreciate her pointing that out. So what she was saying is basically a lot of people don't realize the level of training law enforcement goes through and the responsibility that comes with using lethal force. It is extensive. And again, you're criminally liable for how you use lethal force. And she brings up a really good point that I found chilling as I went through some of the intelligence that I saw was out there prior to January 6th. One bit of intelligence, and I again referencing this in the book, is if they shoot first, let them know what happens. Think about that. And then we had people that were armed. We found a weapon inside the Capitol. There was other weapons out there. Metropolitan found several weapons on people. We did too. But to find that in intelligence saying, let them shoot first, but show them what's going to happen if they do. That sent a chill up my spine. And it's right in line with what you're talking about. But yeah, people just need to realize before they start saying, and you'll read about it. I had very high profile people telling me, why didn't you just change the rule of engagement during it and open fire? That's not how it works. Any other questions? Oh, yes, sir. We got one.
What, in your opinion, was the intelligence that was missed by the FBI? You spoke about that earlier, and other agencies that might have forbidden.
So we're now seeing that there was significant intelligence out there talking about people online planning, talking about a planned coordinated attack. There was very descriptive intelligence of some of the access points for the Capitol. I mean, down to the number of officers that staff it. That shows pre-attack surveillance. And that you combine it all together, but it's not like it's just one or two. It was a ongoing that had been happening for weeks. And that's what is concerning when you don't see this level of intelligence reported by any of the major agencies. Think about it. On September 11th, we had a major attack and we had so many lessons learned about intelligence, about connecting the dots that are applicable today to January 6th. My concern is what are we going to have in the future that's going to be applicable to January 6th? Who knows? But it's now clear that there's a lot of intelligence out there, a lot of people talking about attacking the Capitol, bringing guns, killing members of Congress. That really should have made it into the hands of the right people. Conti, Chief Conti, myself, the people that are really controlling security here in Washington, D.C. Was there one of the questions in the back? I think we're just about with time. Oh, yes, one more question.
Real briefly, what difficulties would be there for the president? And I'm not sure if the Insurrection Act applies here, but how difficult would it have been for the president upon seeing this to call out the National Guard?
That's one of the things that I sit back and I wonder, why didn't we get some support? I talk about a very important call that I got, but it wasn't the president. It would have been nice for them to send some help. He is the commander in chief. I think you had brought up earlier in each of the states, the governor has control of the National Guard. In Washington, D.C., that control is vested with the president, which he delegated to the Secretary of Defense, who then delegated the Army to the Secretary of the Army. To the Sec Army, and the Air Assets, the Secretary, the Air Force. But in an emergency situation where I'm requesting emergency assistance, that's clearly outlined. That's the president's decision. But I should be getting the help I need while they're waiting to find what his decision is going to be. He's the commander in chief. He was watching, what everyone else was watching on TV. Why we didn't get why didn't elect to send the security to help us? I don't know.
Time for one more.
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you again. And thank you for your comments about lethal force. We see what goes on in Iran and places like that. Thank God we live where we do, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the Secret Service during that time when they were trying to get Mike Pence out, or if you had any interaction with them, or your sense of relationship between you guys and them?
Very good relationship. Very good relationship. Gosh, you take me to so many different stories, but I don't want to give this one up. There's another one in there. But I will tell you this. There was several discussions with Pence while this was playing out. Two things I will note. One, he was very concerned about what the officers were going through. I was really that was his first question with me. And then two, he made it known every time, I'm not moving, I'm staying, and I want to get back in to get this certification done. So he was dead set on that. I know his, Tim Geibels is his lead for the Secret Service for security detail, and was very concerned about him, extremely professional individual. He had his security in his utmost concern, but Pence was not going to leave until we got back into session. I write about that extensively, the whole process, when he finally got back in, the discussions I had with him, and then when he left. There's a very moving story about when he's leaving the Capitol with the former Senate Sergeant at Arms Michael Stenger. But good question. But I think we're any others. Again, I am truly humbled by the outpouring of support here. Sorry, it's a little bit of a slow start as I got going. It's been a very, very long and emotional day, and it hasn't ended and still has a little ways to go. But I sincerely appreciate all of you coming out. I sincerely appreciate your consideration. I'm sorry, everything that you went through that day was really, really tough. But I do appreciate all the support today. But thank you very much.